All right, terrific. So good morning. I'm Dr. Lisa Mednick Takami. I'm so excited to return to the praxis sessions. I haven't been in one since a little bit earlier in the season this year. And I'm here to present a case study called Race and Social Justice, a case study in equity practice and assessment. And it was really the idea for the session really came out of my own reflections during the time that I was in Equity 101 this winter with Lauren and Nika and a number of others. And I have found that sometimes looking back on what we've done in our equity praxis can be a very impactful way to inform what we're doing here in the present. So the case study that I'm going to be presenting this morning, whoops, shoot, I just went back, hold on a minute. Actually is an overview of a series of events that took place during the 2018-2019 academic year. So let me do an overview of how this series of events came to be. It grew out of a subcommittee of our larger EEO plan committee at El Camino College. And events themselves were driven by one faculty member in the arts who really had a vision to foster student agency around issues of racial oppression, social justice. He had done some events type some years in the past, but nothing had been done along these lines for a significant amount of time. The EEO plan had a variety of objectives, and the subcommittees, including this one, which was the EEO Subcommittee for Campus-Wide Events, was one of the key committees in operationalizing some of the objectives of the EEO plan. So the structure of the event was what he termed a teach-in panel, a teach-in. So it was a panel interview with a local visiting scholar, followed by spoken word performances, spoken word poetry performances by two professional spoken word book scholars. I love that term. And then there were also spoken word poetry performances by students. And really this season, both fall and spring, was an opportunity to engage the campus community in issues of race and social justice. And I was very pleased and honored to chair the subcommittee for this event. I also wanted to just kind of take a little time and talk about structures for equity practice that we have on our campuses. As I mentioned, this particular event came out of the Title IX Equity Diversity office. On that campus at that time, there was and is a lot of activity that comes out of the SEA office due to equity and achievement. But I know on that campus and on your campuses as well, impactful EDI initiatives and events can come out of a variety of areas. And I hope during our discussion time today, we can learn from one another how EDI planning is done on your campus, how coordination takes place, and also how data collection and assessment informs planning. So a reflection question to be thinking about for a little bit later this morning is, where does equity, diversity, and inclusion planning take place on your campus? And by the way, as I'm going along, please feel free to ask any questions if you want to raise your hand or just signal me that you have a question about something. I'm more than happy to take questions along the way. So at this particular campus at El Camino, a lot of the impactful planning at this time was coming out of the Office of Title IX Equity and Inclusion. And you know how it is on your campus. At this particular time, the director for SEA had not yet been hired. So because I was actually sitting on the hiring committee for that, there was some very exciting work placed by some faculty members in humanities and social sciences. They were working on a sort of a small level with communities of practice, other than what this committee wanted to do, which was to be able to impact the EEO plan objectives by doing a variety of things that were campus-wide, that engage students, faculty, staff, and managers. So this department is overseen by a director. And as I mentioned earlier, there were a number of subcommittees that were formed in order to operationalize the EEO plan that, of course, had gone through the whole shared governance process as it does at all of our campuses. So just a basic example of EEO plan objectives was to increase diversity hiring. So one of the other things that I was heavily involved in was the EER training for reps on hiring committees. And so now, several years since this activity was taking place, all hiring committees have implicit bias training before they get started in the hiring process, which was a really, really big step forward that came out of this earlier work, as I said, that was being done during 2018 and 2019. In terms of the committee itself, we were a small and mighty team of about 7, and we were well represented in terms of both academic affairs, student services, and my department, I managed professional development and learning. And so there was a good sort of cross-pollination of ideas and perspectives on planning an event such as this and ultimately implementing it. So what was the rationale for this? Well, I've already mentioned that we had an EEO plan in place with objectives that needed to be operationalized and implemented and then evaluated, but there were other things that were driving the planning as well. We had a campus climate survey in progress. So one of the other EEO plan subcommittees was, which I also served on, was in generating a campus climate survey. One had not been done in several years, but we did not yet have the survey findings. And so we could not use those findings to inform the planning of this particular academic year. However, we did have some things from the SESI survey, and we also had a lot of anecdotal evidence from all of the committee members suggesting that students would really embrace a program of this type. And we really wanted to drill down. And of course, this is pre-COVID. This is pre the racial reckoning and the murders that we've seen in the last year. So this was pre a lot of the anti-Black racism that we've been seeing and confronting in our campuses through the call to action in this last year. But it was an important precursor, I believe, for this campus to be completely ready to respond and move forward on some objectives that had been in place either through the SEA plan, the EE plan, or others for a period of about 5 years. The faculty member had very good contacts in both the progressive academic and political activist communities. And that helped us because one of my roles at El Camino was to find speakers for events like this. But he had a bevy of contacts. It took quite a bit of time for us to contact these people, commit to a time in the semester that we felt would attract the campus. And all of that stuff took some time. So our planning actually started in June of 2018. And of course, most of our faculty members on the committee were off contract during the summer. So then we picked up again in the fall. My department designed a promotional flyer. We used a variety of strategies to promote the event. We didn't have a whole lot of time to promote. By the time we got ourselves together for the fall semester, I'll know how busy the fall semester can be, calendared a time in an auditorium and came to consensus about the timing of the semester that we thought this would work well. We had about 3 weeks to promote, and we did that through email blasts, our social media channels. We had hard copies of the flyers all over campus. We had the faculty announcing to classes to encourage their students to come for extra credit. We had announcements at Academic Senate. We had a registration link that was provided by the counseling department But this was one of our challenges. Excuse me just a second, my dog is scratching and I don't want him to disturb us anymore. It's a Zoom moment, excuse me. We were a little bit challenged with the duration because as Professional Development and Learning Department, because of regulations around FERPA, we don't have access to student email. And so we made the registration optional. And so when I get to the flyer in just a moment, you'll see that, hold on a second. Ooh, why is my slide not advancing here? Hold on a second. Okay, there we go. So you'll see that there's not a QR code on our this was the first registration, the first promotional flyer that we used. And we had to kind of play around with what counseling could do, what student services could do that we couldn't do in professional development and learning. And we were a little bit, we felt like this was an event that would attract, but whenever you're stepping out there and doing something for the first time, you don't really know. So here you'll see Dr. Robin Kelly was our invited speaker from UCLA. We were very fortunate that Dr. Kelly agreed to a very, very modest honorarium. So in terms of a budget, we were quite okay. David Barsamian was the journalist who interviewed Dr. Kelly. Dr. Irene Sanchez and her partner, Mr. Matthew Cedillo, were our spoken word artists. So here is a little bit about our program structure. As I said, the event was held in the Marcy Auditorium, so we had the ability to attract a large crowd, but we were prepared for the fact that we may only have a couple of classes with their professors. So we had the interview with Dr. Kelly, and then we set up microphones so students, and we really encouraged students to come and ask questions, and they did. They asked a lot of questions, followed by the spoken word performances. And I see I've got a typo there, so that should say public scholar and activist. And they told very compelling stories about their own backgrounds. Dr. Kelly spoke very openly about encouraging students to be critical thinkers and to question everything, as he does in his work as a professor. Then we had an outdoor reception with refreshments, and then we came back in for the spoken word performances from the students, which were riveting. We had 4, I believe, on that day. So here are our outcomes. Much to our surprise, amazement, and delight, we had more than 500 students, faculty, and staff attend. And because I did this type of event planning for 5 years, I can tell you that was a really good turnout, especially for an October afternoon. I think we were a Wednesday afternoon, midday. And so that right away told us, wow, there's really a hunger for events that very specifically address racial oppression, a sense of agency. We saw that the spoken word poetry, which I had seen for the first time at NCORE conferences, was a really good vehicle to bring together and give them that voice. There was also very strong positive audience participation feedback. I mentioned the Q&A session after the interview, but there was also a lot of this, and there was just a lot of positive energy in the room. As a result of that, in meeting with students during the reception, we saw that we had the opportunity to do something that was really just focused on the students. So as I mentioned earlier, this particular event was open to the entire community. Because of some safety concerns that the faculty member had about the political nature of what we were discussing, we opted not to open it to the public. And that was one of I'm sorry? I think there was some background noise. That was a number of discussions that we had in the committee. Should we open this to the public? And we decided to. Um, and because of some security concerns, we did have campus police in clothing. They were just kind of wandering around. We had no security issues whatsoever. As I said, the energy in the room, it was one of the most positive events. It was one of the most positive experiences that I came through during my 5.5 years at El Camino. So again, some reflection questions to be thinking about when we do our individual reflections and when we're in small groups. What have been the most impactful EDI programs or events on your campus? What do you attribute to be the success factors? And what were some of the lessons learned? And when I ask these questions, I say this knowing full well that some of our communities of practice are long-standing embedded initiatives, programs, as opposed to these events that I'm talking about there. But I think one of the things that I took away from the Equity 101 class is that regardless of what the praxis is, our reflection and our implementing theory with practice and reflection, I think is probably what's most important, as opposed to the structure of the particular EDI event. Hold on one second. Okay, so what were the lessons learned for this particular series of events? The first is that we realized only in retrospect that we really needed to decide on our data collection in time when we were planning the series of events. We were challenged by a couple of different things. I mentioned that PDEL, Professional Development and Learning, we are not allowed access to student email or anything like that. And so we had to be very careful. At the time, the director of research position was vacant. And so a natural partnership would have been to institutional planning, but they were with the director and were very trained because earlier they were in the process of doing what they were always, plus deploying the campus climate survey was critical for a number of areas on campus. So we realized that next time that we would go into the planning, deciding ahead of time who would be collecting the data, how it was going to be collected. We agreed at the time that one of the administrators from counseling was going to do that data collection. Unfortunately, this individual left the campus, took a promotion at another camp, and there wasn't really anybody else in counseling to be able to do the data collection. So we realized, again, in retrospect, that we needed to have better coordination with SE. We were under the title office and professional development and learning to ensure that the data collection and analysis took place, because it was really a lost opportunity. So my questions, again, for personal and group reflection are: how was EDI collection handled on your campus? How are findings incorporated into planning? How is EDI programming coordinated across your campus, given the nature of California community colleges in this area? And what lessons can you share from your campus? Okay, so that is the overall presentation of the case study. I'm happy to answer any questions participants might have about what I've shared before we go into our individual and small group discussion questions. Thank you.
Anyways, I just want to say this was great work that you've done at El Camino College. I was just wondering, was it also in part with what was going on in 2018? Because all that was going on with the Starbucks issue and calling on Black people for just simply living life. And that's when the whole barbecue Becky, coupon Carl and all that stuff that was going on throughout 2018. Was that one of the factors, or was that just happened to be coincidence? Because what I've noticed in 2018 up to now is that it's been more brazen. Maybe it's because of our technology. We've been a little more recording more and actively recording. But did it have anything to do with that, or was it also a history of all the shootings from, Tamir Rice and all, way back,
Yes.
with George
So,
Zimmerman. Yeah. Sorry.
so
Thank you.
these are, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying thank you for listening. I'm going to mute myself.
Absolutely. So it's interesting the perspective of retrospect, because before we came on this morning, I was watching footage from Minneapolis and waiting for the verdict to come out from the Chauvin trial. And you're absolutely right. The answer to your question is yes. I think my own mind is planted in the present, but the whole discussion in this city before because we did a number of other things. These are the two events that I chose to highlight for this praxis session, but it was in the discussion of really the frustration of the faculty, all of us really on the committee, that the campus had not done anything to bring voice to address the very things that you mentioned. I want to be really clear and transparent in making sure that I'm not coming from the perspective that the problems that we've seen in 2021 are limited to that year. You highlighted a number of them. I don't think we discussed any one particular one that you just mentioned. It was more that in the climate of race relations in the United States, let's say going, we probably started our planning we probably came together as a committee in the fall of 2017. And the planning for this started in the spring of 2018. So I think really what I recall of those discussions of the time is, in the climate of race relations in which we are living, police brutality, the justice system, and so on, we must respond as an institution of public education. We must do better to respond to our students in this manner. And it was exciting to know that this professor had done something, but it had been 10 years and it was frustrating. I partnered very closely with African-American colleague who was Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at that time. And we just looked at one another and said, we really need to explain to leadership that it's not okay for us to be silent. So that was really the impetus of it. And thank you for asking that question. That was excellent.